Hey everyone, Rick Albert here. Let's talk about this whole NAR settlement, National Association of Realtors, from an investor's perspective and what you need to know. Let's get started. Okay, so I put together this little presentation to kind of go over some of the highlights, what you should be aware of. So let's kind of jump into it. Okay, so first of all, if you're watching this, is because you're on one of my social media platforms, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Many of you probably know who I am. I am a local investor here in Los Angeles. I do house hack. I do own properties out of state. I'm an agent with America Real Estate, where I help clients such as yourselves buying and selling. I'm also a moderator for a landlords group here in Southern California. We're at almost 1,100 members. I'm very proud of that group and all of the interactions that we have. So let's dive into it. So here's some of the highlights of the settlement. So the National Association of Realtors has to pay out $418 million over about 4 years. There's people in that settlement. It was a class action lawsuit. So you're only getting money if you're part of that settlement. I've read online, it's going to be like a couple bucks once everything hashes out, but regardless. Agents are no longer allowed to advertise the agent buy-side commission in the multiple listing service and on most public sites. So right now, how it's structured is I can go into the multiple listing service, scroll down and see how much of usually a percentage or a dollar amount can be paid if I represent a buyer on this transaction. That has been a big problem. We'll kind of go into that. NAR continues to claim any wrongdoing. A lot of this is just to kind of move on. Most realtors who are a member of the National Association of Realtors are covered under the settlement. So if you're thinking, hey, I want to go back to my old realtor and try to get my commission back, that's not how this works. Everyone who is a member, for the most part, is still covered. There are exceptions depending on what company you work for. And the big thing right now is nothing's happening until July. And everything that I'm talking about right now is subject to change, especially once we start seeing new documentation come out. There's a lot going on that's going to make things complicated. So I'm hoping that they're going to start hashing this out. So where did a lot of this settlement stem from? Even pre-settlement, right? This has been a conversation for a long time. So there's been a lot of lack of transparency. There's many buyer's agents out there that said, my services are free. They're not free. They never have been free. Somebody has to pay. You could argue that the buyer does pay, not the seller net proceeds. So what happens is the buyer gives all of this money to a seller. Then that total dollar amount, which is in an escrow account, gets divvied up, agents, escrow, title, whatever. Then the seller gets what's remaining. That is how the pay structure used to be. Now things are changing and we'll see how that changes. And a lot of this came from lack of proper disclosures. Every state's different. Some states are much clearer than others in terms of how agents were getting paid. They also made this argument that agents sellers that are like, hey, instead of paying what's common typically was between 2 to 3%. Again, there's been no standard, never has been, but they did notice if you offered less than that, 1% or nothing at all, agents who represented buyers, if there was two homes that were identical, they're more likely to steer them towards the listings that paid them more. And some sellers felt like that was unfair. Some might argue that's how capitalism works. Regardless, that's what they were saying. And just so you know, in case an agent does try to pull something that they shouldn't, an agent does have an ethical obligation to present all homes to their clients that meets their criteria. However, they don't have to represent them. So if there's a home that my client really wanted or liked, I would send it to them because it met all their criteria. But if they didn't pay a commission, I can go to that buyer and say, look, I'm presenting you this home because it meets your criteria, but I don't have to represent you, right? Hey, here's a multifamily as an investment opportunity. I can't represent you because they're not paying enough. And then it comes up to the buyer. Do they want to pursue it? Do they want to pay the agent? Or do they want to go find other properties? There is the perception of collusion, since the general norm has been 5 to 6% commissions for decades. You could make an argument that there has been. I have seen conversations, agents like, well, what are you charging? What am I charging? And a lot of that was more from an educational standpoint. It wasn't necessarily for collusion, but there is that perception. And there's also a perception that being an agent's easy and that, frankly, we get paid too much. For a lot of my buying clients, they know that's not true. A lot of my clients are getting below list, really good negotiation tactics, finding stuff off market, even on the listing side, being able to achieve record high sales that more than made up the commissions, that sort of deal. But there's still that perception. This is my opinion. So I think the real problem was there's way too many agents in the marketplace with way too little inventory. There are actually at this point not enough business to go around. I know, for example, a few years ago in Austin, Texas, there was a report that came out saying there was 8 agents to 1 listing. That tells us there's not enough business to go around. And because that agents had to start thinking creatively, but the problem is some, I think, were thinking in the wrong direction, starting to do shady stuff, not disclosing properly to try to get business. The barrier to entry, far too low. It's a few classes, an exam where, to be honest, the majority of the questions on the exam have nothing to do with your job. When I got my broker's license, which is a step up, a lot of the questions were lender questions. So, the problem with that is I'm not applying to be a loan officer. The answer should have been E, talk to a loan officer, versus, hey, here's when the home was built, what disclosures are required? Hey, what does this term mean in these disclosures? That sort of deal matters more than oftentimes what's being mentioned in the exam. Also, in a lot of offices, there's no formal or required training on how to negotiate or properly represent a client. Oftentimes, it's all about marketing and getting business. That's all it's always been about for a lot of offices, not, hey, here's how to properly do your job, right? I remember once I had to educate an agent who's been in the business for over 30 years on what some basic terminology was. The worst part was when you read her bio, she literally said that she was a director of training in her office. That's a problem. Housing Wire reported in January that the average agent only closed 5 deals. That's, again, not enough business to go around. And some of this, I think, kind of stemmed from the extremely hot market from 2020 to 2022. There were a lot of homes where you can actually overprice them and they were still getting multiple offers. That market has since softened with interest rates going up. Home prices have come up. So the market has shifted. But I think that's where my point earlier, people thought our job was too easy. It was because of how hot the market was. So some things to consider. This is a nationwide issue with local impact. So some markets won't see any changes in how business is being done. Other states will. For example, in some states, having a buyer-broker agreement has always been required. In California, it hasn't. Every state's different, with California having more disclosures than others. So in our listing agreements, it's always been clear commissions have been negotiable. Not all states had that. So that's why a lot of the people felt like they were being tricked or whatever it might be. And there's always been discount brokers out there, right? That's never changed. Purple Bricks, they were flat fee brokers. They were based out of the UK. They came to California. They went out of business soon after. Rex Real Estate, slowly dying. They are citing Zillow and MLS collusion, but they're also not doing well. And then, of course, there's Help You Sell. There's Redfin. Both of which have been around for a long time. They don't have huge market share. And then, of course, the general real estate agent communities, right? So someone with part of a big name brokerage, but they themselves are a discount broker. That's always been around. You see the ads everywhere. So how do most agents get paid? I think this is really important to note because we want to make sure that everybody understands what's happening behind the scenes. So first of all, let's say it was 5%. Again, totally negotiable, never been a standard. It can be split in a variety of ways between the agent that's representing the seller and the agents representing the buyer, but it has been common to split it 50-50, right? That's been somewhat common. Then from there, so you get 2.5%, there's a commission split between the agent and the brokerage. different models for splitting. It could be 80-20, so I keep 80%, brokerage gets 20%. It could be capped out, so I paid the brokerage X number of dollars, then I get 100%. There's flat fee brokerage, there's a bunch. And then of course you still have your fees. So National Association of Realtors, MLS, multiple listing service, insurance, desk fees, whatever it might be. And then there's the marketing and office fees. So photography, videography, gas, car maintenance, cell phone bill, all these other fees that happen behind the scenes. So this came from ZipRecruiter. They call it a salary. It's mostly commission based, but that's probably just how their model works. But they said the average agent made $96,000 and at $46 an hour. There's a couple things to note. My hunch is that this is based off gross income, meaning this is probably after the commission split, but before all the expenses. I think once you factored in a lot of the expenses, that 96,000 probably goes down to about 75,000. The problem with that is there's plenty of other jobs out there, frankly, that pay the same or more. And you have your nights and weekends back. You wouldn't have the stress of trying to recruit more clients, that sort of deal. I also think that dollar per hour is actually probably lower than what's being advertised. That's based off of a common 40-hour work week. When a lot of agents work more than that, they tend to work nights, weekends doing showings. Then during the day, they have to schedule appointments. They need to negotiate inspections, all that kind of stuff. It can be a 24-hour job if you don't put the right systems in place. Now, as an investor, why do I care? Right? That's why you guys are watching this video, why you guys are watching this webinar. So on the buy side, you're going to have to review the buyer-broker agreements carefully. How long is the agreement for? 3 months, 6 months, a year? Do you have to pay anything? So I actually see, and a lot of agents do this, they charge their buyers a transaction fee. I have no problem being out there and outspoken and say that's a BS fee. Part of the job of the buyer's agent is to manage the transaction. So why are you passing that buck on to the buyer? If that's the case, they might as well manage it themselves. But if in the discussion of commissions, like, okay, well, if the seller's not paying a commission, you, the buyer, are you going to pay the difference? Are you going to pay anything? What does that negotiation look like? Also, is it an exclusive agreement, non-exclusive, or property specific? So part of the agreement was the only way I can show a property is if I have this broker agreement in place. Like, so if you called me and said, Rick, I'm an investor, I see a great house hacking opportunity in Granada Hills or Calabasas, can we go see it today? I'd be like, fine, but I need this signed. It's not a choice. But they have options. And again, we'll see as more comes out, but there's the exclusive, you're working with me exclusively. There's non-exclusive, you're working with a bunch of agents, or property specific, I'm going to see this home. I will tell you, if there are clients that have signed an exclusive agreement and clients that have signed a non-exclusive agreement, the agents, if they have something off market, if there's certain properties that are good deals, they're sending it to their exclusive buyers first. So you are going to want to think about what you're expecting out of the agent, and if you really want to work with this one. So that's something to point there. And then of course, if you are locking in with an agent, are they really qualified to represent you? This is one of my most exciting things about this whole ordeal. There's people out there like, it's my cousin, he's cutting me a break on the commission. Oh, it's my best friend who just left becoming a plumber to become a real estate agent. I want to use him. Now that you're actually going to have to sign this agreement, you're going to want to make sure that person's well qualified to represent you. Right? Ask the open-ended questions. Have you ever negotiated below list price? Have you ever negotiated credit? Give me an example of when you're in multiple offers and you got the offer accepted. These are things that you need to ask these agents because this is becoming a bigger deal. This is the most, for many of you, the biggest purchase of your life. Don't you want to work with someone that's well qualified? Right? Think about that. So some things to look out for in a buyer's agent. So for example, negotiations. And this actually was recent for one of my clients. We were in multiple offers, got it for below list price, plus a $10,000 credit, and it even appraised for higher. That's happened. Got all my buyers' closing costs paid. I've also been able to pull that off. Are they investors themselves, right? I house hack. I've owned other rentals here in Los Angeles. I've own out of state. If you're working with someone that's never even owned property, you might want to second guess. They don't know those pain points that you're feeling. And I'm not saying I felt every pain point, but damn if I felt a lot of them. And if I haven't, I have the resources. They need to know or have the resources to understand Los Angeles rent control. In my landlords group, for example, I see a lot of people posting that just joined the group saying, hey, I just bought this property. I want to do X, Y, and Z. And people are chiming in saying you can't. And if they had an agent that knew those answers beforehand, they wouldn't be in the position that they're in. So, and because the laws change all the time, it's good to have those resources on hand. For all my buyer clients who buy in rent controlled markets, I always send them information about it. And also the age of working with an unqualified family member or friend is over. And as I mentioned before, that's out the window. Oh, I have a buddy who's kicking in half his commission. Well, guess what? You're going to get discounted services and you're probably going to get a bad deal. It happens. And I've seen it happen. So as an investor, why do I care? Sell side. First of all, you never had to pay a buy side commission, but expect the home to sell for less or maybe more than the equivalent commission, right? Because again, they say between 80 to 90% of buyers use agents. So if there's no way for them to get compensated, they're not going to show your home. They're not going to show your investment property. Something to think about. So expect the home to take longer to sell. You can still pay through a credit. So in other words, hey, I'm giving a credit of $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 on the buy side for the buyer, but really that credit's going to the agent. You can't do that for VA buyers though. So hopefully the government will step in and be like, look, we got to protect our veterans because they're not allowed to pay any sort of commission any way, shape, or form. Or it can be paid even how it's done now. Technically, as you look at the listing agreement, you're paying your listing agent, whatever it is, 5%, 6%. Then out of that, the broker is paying the buy side agent. So there are still it's still going to work around. Savvy sellers and listing agents will know what to do and how to structure the pricing to get the most activity. So you have to have that conversation of like, look, how do we do this so I get the best price? And again, it's all about the net price. How do I maximize that? And at the end, ultimately, the market will decide, right? I've had listings where I was like, yeah, I think we're pushing on the price, and it's still sold for higher because the market shifts, the market changes. So what to look for in a listing agent? So right off the bat, what marketing efforts do you do? Right? Is it professional photos or cell phone photos? Do they pay for any email marketing services? Right? If you're paying them this money, are they spending the money, right, to get your home sold? How do they come up with their price? It's common practice for unethical agents to tell a seller that they can get an X dollar price, knowing they can convince the seller later on to take a lower price. So it's like, look, I think your home can sell for $1 million. I don't have any proof of it, but I think it can. Then you go on the market, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Oh man, the market's clearly telling us we need to do a price reduction. Versus another agent's like, look, your home is worth $800,000. Here are all the sales that support that. If I'm wrong, we get a bidding war. If I'm right, it still gets sold. Something to think about. Also, how do they handle negotiations? Almost always another round. There's always another round of negotiations, whether it's the appraisal, inspections, whatever. And that's almost. I've had some listings where I've gotten no requests in. I've had some where I've gotten tons. And also keep in mind, giving up something isn't a bad thing. Like giving a small credit isn't a bad thing if it means you get the property sold, right? The goal is to not only sell, but to close. So if you have any questions, go ahead and comment below. Share with your friends. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to helping more investors here in the Southern California market. I think that although there are a lot of challenges here in Los Angeles and kind of the surrounding area, I think there are a lot of opportunities if you're game for it. Happy to chat about it. You guys have a great rest of your day.